Hello and welcome. Today I'm going to walk you through how to complete an annotated bibliography. This video will show you how to format your annotated bibliography and how to find the evaluation information that you need to complete your annotated bibliography. Let's get started. First, I'm going to format my Word document. Here you can see my fully formatted Word document. I have my name at the top of my heading, followed by my instructor's name, the course, and the date. The title of my paper is going to be Annotated Bibliography, and then I have my working thesis right here below it. Offering substantial student loan forgiveness would improve the U.S. economy. I also have my header up here at the top with my last name and page number. Now that I have my document fully formatted, let's take a look at a few of the sources that I am going to use in my annotated bibliography. Here is my first source. The title is Putting Student Loan Forgiveness in Perspective. How costly is it and who benefits? I know that I need to evaluate this source as part of my annotated bibliography. I am going to need to look at the author, publisher, publication date, evidence, and bias to properly evaluate the source. Let's start with the author. I can see here that the author's name is Adam Looney, and he is a non-resident senior fellow in economic studies and the executive director of the Mariner S. Eccles Institute at the University of Utah. If I click on his name, I can see his bio, where it lists some of his other experience in economics and tax analysis and his education in economics. It looks like he has a PhD in economics from Harvard. Since he has a lot of educational and professional experience in economics, I would consider him a credible author. Next, we are going to take a look at the source itself. I got this article from a website called Brookings. If I go back to the article homepage, I'm going to find their About Us page to learn a little bit more about the website. Reading through their About Us page, I have learned that the Brookings Institution is a nonprofit public policy organization whose mission it is to conduct in-depth research leading to new ideas for solving problems facing society at the local, national, and global level. Their research experts are from the government and academia, and their research agenda is rooted in open-minded inquiry and have scholars with diverse points of view. This sounds like they're a very reputable organization, based on the experts writing their articles and the content of their articles. That does not follow a specific research agenda, so their articles are also probably not very biased. Heading back to our article, I can see that this was published in 2021, making it very recent, which is great for me because I need recent information for my particular research topic. I can also see by scrolling through the text of the article itself that Looney is linking to sources such as the National Bureau of Economics Research and the Department of Education. So now that I've looked at all of the different elements of credibility in this article, I would say that this is a very credible source. It is written by an author who is an expert on the topic, and it was published by a reputable publisher. The article is very recent, which is important for my research topic, and it cites other credible outside sources. Finally, this article shows very little bias because the publisher, Brookings Institution, does research on a variety of subjects. Now that I know this article is credible, I can head back to my annotated bibliography and include the MLA citation for this article. Here is my MLA citation for this article. You can see that I have the author's name in last name, comma, first name order, followed by a period. I have the title of the article, Putting Student Loan Forgiveness in Perspective, How Costly Is It and Who Benefits, in quotation marks. I have the name of the website in italics, followed by the publication date in day, month, year order, and the URL to find the website itself, with a period to close it out at the end. If you have any questions about MLA format or how to format your sources in MLA, feel free to take a look at the MLA guide on the library's website. This guide will walk you step by step through how to cite literally everything imaginable in MLA format. So for the example that I used for my annotated bibliography, I could click on citing a website, and I'll see the format and some examples of how to cite articles from websites in MLA format. So now that I've completed my MLA citation, I'm ready to complete my annotation. There are going to be 3 parts to an annotation in an annotated bibliography: the summary, the evaluation, and your use of the source. So first I have the summary, which I can see here in green. The summary is going to be about 2 to 3 sentences explaining what the source is about. The next section is going to be the evaluation. This is where I'm going to determine whether or not my source is credible enough for me to include in my essay, and we can see the evaluation here in orange. This is where I'm going to discuss the author, the publisher, the publication date, evidence, and the bias of the source, like we just did a few minutes ago. And then finally, we're going to end with our use of the source, which is here in yellow. This is how you're going to mention how you plan to use the source in your essay. Let's take a look at another source. This time, I found a source that doesn't have an author, which is actually more common than you may think. The article I have here is called "The Fallacy of Forgiveness. If the Feds Wipe Out Student Debt, Who Benefits the Most?" Once again, I'm going to start with my evaluation of the source, and already I can see that this source is peer-reviewed, which means that a panel of experts reviewed this article and agreed that it could be published by this journal, so it is already a clue to its credibility. Now, right off the bat, I noticed that I do not have an author's name listed. That is okay. It doesn't make the source unusable, but it is something to consider. So let's just move on to the publisher of the source, which is Education Next. I'm going to click on the title of the publisher to see if I can find a little bit more information about them. I can see that when I click on the source under description, it mentions that Education Next is a scholarly journal of the Hoover Institution, and it explores issues relating to education policy and K-12 education reform in the United States. But this doesn't really tell me a lot about the publisher, so I'm going to Google the Hoover Institute and see what they're all about. Now, I can see based on my Google search that the Hoover Institution is a conservative public policy institution, which means that Education Next is going to have a conservative point of view or bias. While having a political bias does not mean that I can't use the source in my paper, it means that I will need to keep this in mind when I start reading the article. Now, heading back to the article, I can see that this source was published in 2021, making it extremely recent, which is great for my research topic. But I am noticing as I start to scroll through the text of the article, while it does contain some statistics, there are no citations or sources listed anywhere. How am I supposed to know if these statistics are true or not if there's no way for me to validate the information? This article is a little bit trickier than the first article to determine whether it is credible or not. First, there is no author listed, which isn't an immediate sign of something not being credible, but it is something to keep in mind. Since I don't know who wrote this article, I can't be sure that they're an expert on this topic. The publisher of the source is Education Next, which is a peer-reviewed journal. While it being a peer-reviewed journal is a great sign, since that means that the articles had to be vetted by other experts before being published, this source does have a conservative political bias. This article is from 2021, making it very current, which is important for my research topic, but I do not see any citations where the author is backing up their argument. Because of all of these factors, this source is not as credible as the first source. However, I may still use this source in my paper because it is a good example of an opposing viewpoint on the topic, though I might do some more research to find another article that is a little bit more credible. Once again, I'm going to head back to my annotated bibliography, where I will include the MLA citation for this article. Since I didn't have an author's name, I'm just going to leave that section blank and start with the title of my article, in quotation marks, "The Fallacy of Forgiveness. If the Feds Wipe Out Student Debt, Who Will Benefit Most?" Next, I'm going to have the title of my source, Education Next, in italics, followed by the volume number, the issue number, the date, the page number, and the database that I got this information from. Once again, I built my citation based on the MLA guide on the SCC library website. But once again, I'm going to start with a brief 2 to 3 sentence summary of what my source is about. And the summary is really important because chances are your reader hasn't read this article like you have. And I have the summary here in green. Next, I'm going to move on to my evaluation, which I can see here in orange. And this is where I'm going to discuss the different evaluation elements: the author or lack thereof, publisher, date, evidence, and bias. Finally, I'm going to explain how I will use this source in my annotated bibliography, which you can see an example here of in yellow. And that's how you complete an annotated bibliography. Thanks so much for taking the time to watch this video. If you have any questions, please feel free to ask a librarian.